We've got some wonderful experts today on the session. We've got Bev Clark from Bell Clark Lawyers. Thank you so much for joining us, Bev.
My pleasure, Marissa. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. And we've got Nani Johnston, who's one of our wonderful mortgage brokers at Rise High Financial Solutions. Nani's been very experienced in this area and has helped lots of people in this situation. So thanks for joining us today, Nani.
Thank you, Marissa.
And I believe that it's first time for Nani and Bev, so we're really excited about today's segment. So really glad that both of you ladies could join us today. So look, before we get started on our topic, once again, thanks for tuning in. But we've had a really exciting month in the Rise High teams. So I just wanted to share some exciting news with you. We actually had the South Australian Accounting Awards that we had a few weeks ago, and I'm really pleased to say that Rise High Accounting won the award for Best Customer Service, which is absolutely amazing given they've only been operating for a year, but the customers and Rise High Accounting clients just love them to bits, and they really grateful to our clients for this. And we also had the official launch of my new book, The Rise High Investor, and that was a fantastic party. We really celebrated, and really glad that I'm already getting some great feedback from clients that are really loving this book. So if you're interested in it, you can go to risehighinvestor.com.au to find out more. So now let's get back to the topic of today. Because it is a bit of a sensitive topic, we have decided that all of the questions that we have received are going to be anonymous tonight. I'm not going to be saying any names. So if you do have a question during the segment, you can put a comment in the Facebook Live segment if you're happy for your name to be revealed. If you prefer to have an anonymous question, then Amanda is on standby. You can email your question through to amanda@risehigh.com.au and she will feed those questions through to us today. So we are going to keep all the questions anonymous, and we really just want it to be packed full of value for you tonight. So anything you want to know, please get in touch with us during the session. So let's get started. I guess in this topic, we know that based on the questions that we've already received, there's a few different types of people that will be watching this segment. So we obviously have those of you who are at the very early stages and potentially haven't actually gone through the separation yet and just thinking about it. We've also got those of you who are actually going through the separation at the moment, and then we've got those of you who have actually gone through the separation or the divorce and now at the other end of it and wanting to rebuild your lives financially. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can throughout all of those stages of the journey, and try and give as much information as possible. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with you, Bev. I guess let's start from the very beginning. You've got two people, they've decided to part ways. What should they do? You know, once they've made that decision that it's not going to work, what's the next step?
I think the starting point, Marissa, is getting wise advice. I think half the problem for a lot of people is that they go ahead and they do deals that either are to their disadvantage. So they don't know what they don't know what they need to consider, and then they might strike a deal that is then hard to resile from. Either they've been too generous, and then once they get their advice later on, they realise that, oh my goodness, that's not reasonable, and how can I manage myself in the future? And secondly, they can sometimes set themselves up for failure because they can't honour the commitment, and then the other party sees that as a breach of their agreement, and then that creates drama. I think that I'm all for people trying to resolve their matters respectfully and directly, rather than always engaging lawyers, which can come at a cost, but also can come at an addition to the conflict. A lot of the time when people see a lawyer, the other party feels quite confronted by that, and it's not a good platform for a good negotiation. So I'm all for people trying to negotiate directly, but I think before they do that, it would be wise for them to get some advice so that they at least get off on the right foot. They know what's reasonable for them to prepare for their negotiation, how to conduct the negotiation, what to ask for, and also maybe how to protect themselves in the event of concern.
And I guess, I mean, that's a really good point, but I think that for a lot of people, especially people that I've come in contact with, it's really hard for them to know who they can trust for that advice.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, forgive me because you're not one of these, but some lawyers out there do have a bit of a reputation of really just trying to use these situations to, I guess, get fees, and not necessarily looking to help the party to have a, I guess to resolve it comfortably and to resolve it without too much conflict.
In a cost-effective way.
In a cost-effective way. So I guess what advice would you give people to help them to choose or identify the right people to get the advice from that are going to help them if they do want as little conflict as possible and they want it to run as smoothly as possible, and generally speaking, you know, the partners are comfortable working most things out on their own. How can they find the right people to give that advice?
It's really difficult. I mean, obviously, I'd love people to come and see us at Bev Clark. We are in the collaborative community, so we have.
What does that mean?
What it means, collaborative practitioners are practitioners that are trained in a certain model of dispute resolution, where we actually will contract with our clients and with the other party that we won't go to court. So we will contract specifically to avoid court process and to keep people out of court. We think that court generally can only be used as the last resort, and I think that a lot of practitioners, unfortunately, if you only have, as someone said, if you only have a hammer in your toolbox, every problem looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And so if you go to a practitioner who I would call the litigation pit bull, they only have that as a tool, and so no surprises, a lot of their clients end up in court. Very few of our clients end up in court because I think it's a place of last resort. It is absolutely necessary for a very small number of cases. It is not necessary for the vast majority of people. So staying out of court is a really good approach.
And that would probably save money as well, I would imagine.
Saves a bucket load of money.
Plus a lot of emotion and time.
No one in their right mind would buy a product that is the most expensive product we could possibly sell them, take the longest, be the most stressful, and have an uncertain outlook.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee what a court will do any more than any other lawyer can guarantee what a judge will do. Depends on the judge, depends on the evidence, too many variables. And so staying out of court if they can is the best approach, and that's what we're committed to. And other collaborative practitioners have the same philosophy.
So perhaps if you are looking for that initial advice, but you do feel like you'd like to avoid the court scenario and try and save a bit of money along the way and have a collaborative approach with your ex, then finding a lawyer that does specialise in the collaborative approach rather than litigation would potentially be a good way to go.
Is a good start. Yeah. We run free monthly seminars at our office where we talk to people about what their process options are. So we can talk to them about the pros and cons of sitting across the kitchen table and resolving their matter, going to mediation, doing collaborative, having lawyers negotiate, or going to court. So we can talk about the pros and cons of all those strategies.
Yeah. And there's probably no one size fits all. You know, every family is different. Every situation's different. Exactly. So I guess every situation would require a different approach.
Absolutely. It's funny. I've been doing this 30 years now. I started when I was 12, and I still think, oh wow, something new. You know, you think, oh, I've done it so long. You know, I've seen it all. No, I haven't seen it all. Every family is different. The dynamics are different. Their arrangements are different. So there absolutely isn't a one size fits all.
Yeah.
So they need to be flexible.
And I think you know, a lot of couples do try and resolve the matter themselves, which I think it's great if they can sit down and talk it through and really come to a decision themselves. Obviously, after getting the right advice. But what's the risks involved, or what advice would you give to people that decide to proceed down the path of separation and divorce without a lawyer, like without legal representation? I guess. What are the risks involved?
It depends. Well, the biggest risk is actually that they don't record their agreement in a binding way. So when people have an agreement, they can shake hands, they can write it up themselves, they can both sign it, and it's not binding. And so we see frequently people 10 years down the track where they've done that, they've separated their property, they've sold the house, they've split the proceeds, and then 10 years later, when they haven't recorded it properly, one party has lost all their money in a failed business, for example, the other party has paid off their house, and then it's game on.
Right.
And
that could possibly get messier when future partners are involved.
Absolutely. And the longer people, the other problem I see is the longer people are separated, the more muddy their financial arrangements are because they've acquired more property or they've received an inheritance. I saw someone recently who inherited $1.2 million after the parties separated and before they'd finalised their agreement, and that muddies the water, and it means the other party is saying, oh, hang on a minute, you're so much better off than you were, now I'd like a share of that as well. So lots of things can happen in the process after they separate, so really a clean break early in the piece, if that's appropriate, is a sensible approach. And recording it once they've got an agreement and they've shaken hands on it, get it drafted so that they can finalise it by way of a consent order in the court.
Yeah, so just to sort of summarise that, would your advice be that if they are able to negotiate their settlement amongst themselves, which is obviously the ideal scenario, but then it's really important to take that next step and get it drafted properly by a lawyer, and that would probably be a fairly reasonably cheap exercise compared to what it could be down the track to fight a dispute. So just taking that next step of seeing a lawyer who can draft the agreement so that there's no recourse back from either party down the track.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that sounds sensible to protect your interests.
Yeah, exactly. And that way people can move forward knowing what's theirs and it's going to remain theirs.
And I mean, we're not really talking about children or dependents today, but I just thought it'd be interesting to throw in that question of can that also be part of the agreement that they...
Yeah, it can. People can resolve their children's issues by consent orders in the same document as their property if they want to, or they can get a parenting plan. I'm less likely to be inclined to encourage people to get orders about their kids these days than I did a long time ago. I think that if parents can co-parent their children and be flexible in relation to their arrangements, I think that's the best thing for children. Yeah. And I think sometimes the devil's in the detail when people are trying to sort of record, an 18-month-old baby and you want to record their arrangements until they're 18 years old.
That can be tricky.
It can be tricky
because
and it
things
can create
will change
drama that never becomes a drama if they just dealt with it one increment at a time. But there's lots of advice we can give in relation to how best to co-parent your children after separation.
Yeah, great. Shout out to Elaine, Louise and Erica and Sam and Cheryl. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. Now I'm going to go to Nani. We've just spoken about the legal aspects of the separation process, but can we talk about the financial side? So what are we need to take care of from the financial point of view when you're going through a relationship breakup?
So first of all, it's important if your partner is the person that has been managing your finances, it is very important that you know how things are being managed currently. And it's important for you to also start thinking about how you're going to manage it going forward. It's, at a relationship breakdown time, it is important for you to start focusing on rebuilding your life and start focusing on setting up yourself ahead for the future.
And that can sometimes be a tricky thing to do because you are obviously going through the emotion of the breakup as well, and your head might not necessarily be in that place where you do want to focus on, thinking about the numbers. But I guess it is important to maybe get the right advice or surround yourself with the right people that can help guide you through that process.
Yeah. So I guess there are a few different things with finances. Number one is that you should, I suppose, make a list of all your assets and debts.
Yes, assets and liabilities.
That's very important that you know what is in your joint name, what is in your own name.
And I wonder how many couples have assets and liabilities that their partners don't know about.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
So that's part of the process, I guess.
That's correct, yes. So, I have dealt with a few clients that have gone through that process. We work through it together, we talk about it. Number one is, of course, as I said, making a list of what you have, what you know that you have, that is in your own name or whether it's in joint names.
Yep.
It's important if you have a joint bank account that you speak to the bank, arrange for yourself to have an account just in your name that nobody else have access to. I would even recommend that perhaps you arrange with your company so that your pay is paid directly into that new account that is under your name. Where there are joint bills to be paid out of a joint account, then it's important that you actually discuss it. As Bev has said, it will be nice to start with a very good positive discussion between the two of you to decide on what, whose responsibility it is. How are you going to manage your joint accounts going forward? How are you going to split the bills? If you are, renting, for example, and you're moving out, then you wanted to make sure that your name is taken off the rental agreement, because any damages, then, it's not going to be part of your responsibility. If you have a home loan at the moment, and a lot of us have home loan with redraw capacities.
The redraw.
Yes. So it is important to have that facility removed, because especially a lot of time we will say that one person can sign for the redraw. And
so maybe you can go into the bank and change it from one person to sign to both parties having to sign for the redraw.
Definitely, yes. Yeah,
because you'd hate for one of the parties to access all the redraw and run away with it.
That's correct, yes.
I mean, I guess that can be dealt with from a legal perspective,
it can be.
But why would you want to go down that path if you can avoid it in the first place?
I think what Nani said, though, about the parties talking about that and planning it together is the ideal. Obviously, that isn't always the case when there's no trust in a relationship and someone's worried about the accounts being siphoned, then they might need to take action. But I always think if it's a decent enough relationship and they're respectful to each other, before someone goes and makes that unilateral change to their financial arrangements, having a conversation where they both agree that that's wise for them to do that.
Yes.
Otherwise, sometimes it can be seen as a provocative action. Same as coming home and finding all the furniture's gone, which also frequently happens. That is like throwing a missile.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I've seen happen, which I think is really important that couples talk about before they work out what's going on with this, is that it is really important that couples keep on top of their liabilities during the negotiation period. Yeah. So, we often see that, your spouse will stop paying their portion of the mortgage or will stop paying the credit card, and then the liabilities go into, they go overdrawn and you get late fees, and that can really limit your options.
Definitely.
When we're trying to sort it out down the track. Yes. So I guess it's really important having that conversation and making sure that those liabilities that are in joint names are still being met.
That's right. Yes,
or potentially you might have a credit card that's in your partner's name or vice versa, but it still is going to reflect badly on you, even if you're doing the right thing but your partner's not doing the right thing. So,
that's correct, yes.
So was there anything else that you wanted to cover off on, Nani?
I will say that if you are thinking about retaining the house, for example, it is important. I mean, I would certainly recommend that you come and speak to a broker, for example.
Maybe a Rise High broker.
A Rise High broker, such as myself. No, but it's true, because you do need to know what your options are. Can you keep the house? Can you actually service the house? Because maybe you want to keep the house, but you may not be able to service it based on your income. So you need to know all that up front so that it can be part of the negotiation. I work with Bev and her team in regards to that some of the clients that, will come and see me, and we'll talk through it. The service that we provide in that regards is free, but it's a good advice so that you know what your options are before you actually go down that route of making some sort of agreement that you cannot actually keep in the future.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I think that comes back down to, so perhaps at the early stages, if you are hoping to negotiate a nice agreement between the two of you, getting that initial legal advice and also getting that initial advice from the mortgage broker, just so that you know what you have the capacity to do, is pretty important, so that when you are going through that discussion or negotiation, you can actually put things on the table that are realistic and achievable. So
it's amazing how many times people are negotiating for something that
they don't necessarily know if they
they're
can do
arguing
it.
about someone keeping the house that realistically you just know that's not possible. So why are we wasting your money and time and all this energy on a discussion about something that just can't happen? So getting that early advice, so that and especially when people are looking at what can they afford to pay their spouse, what can they afford to buy to do
That's right.
And
to
that's
buy out the
important as
property.
well, yeah.
If they
Yes.
don't know what they can borrow, they might be making offers that they literally can't live
That's
up to.
exactly right.
And then
yes.
there's that disconnect.
That's correct.
And the
yes.
good thing is
So-
that process is free. From
Yeah.
Rise High Financial Solutions will do that consultation with you for free. So, you know, if you are thinking of going down this track, then, you know, definitely have nothing to lose by sitting down with one of us and just working through the scenario. So that's definitely recommended.
Can I just say something, Marissa?
Yeah,
Something that I
sure.
love about using you guys for getting that kind of advice is I learned this from you, I think, that if people go straight to a bank and then get knocked back with an application, that will stand on their credit rating and will affect their ability in future applications.
That's
Whereas
right.
they can come to you
Yes.
and
We
you
can do the
help,
assessment
you can
without
help them work
actually
out
submitting anything.
exactly.
Yes.
So they're in
yes.
a much more powerful position to
That's
understand
right.
their position
Definitely.
without putting blockers in.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. We've had a comment come through. I'm just looking. They quit or cook the books not to pay child support. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess there's probably some situations where
Correct.
partners could do some sneaky things
Yeah.
like that, where you know, they quit their job
Yeah.
or they declare less on their self-employed income so that they can get out of child support.
Yes.
So what would your advice
It
in
is
that situation
really,
be, Bev?
Really tricky. You know, you can't make a person work, unfortunately, and the tragedy is that some people don't have a commitment to their own children, and so child support is an age-old dilemma. If people have been running a successful business and then suddenly after separation, they're not earning any money, and there's a suspicion that the funds are being paid in cash, there are things you can do about it. You can go to court and you can seek orders, but again, it comes at a cost. So there are some limits in relation to that. If someone has
Would
quit
that
their-
also include if someone's self-employed and
Yeah.
they're
suddenly they're depositing the
suddenly
money
they're
into another
deposit-
account. We can do a forensic investigation in relation to whether the business actually is genuinely, and sometimes businesses genuinely go downhill after people separate because the person running the business is depressed and anxious and having a meltdown as a result of the separation of their family, and sometimes it's strategic and underhanded. So there are forensic accountants that we can work with that can try and investigate that. It is tricky because it's expensive, and sometimes the amount that they spend on that investigation is as much as they're likely to get. So we always have to weigh that up.
Yeah.
But child support can also be calculated on someone's capacity for work, not necessarily what they're actually
that's
earning.
interesting. So
So
if they
there are
are
some things-
choosing not to work,
Yeah.
but they have a capacity to work, then you could use that
Yeah.
argument to
Yeah.
help with child
Yes,
support.
or if they're asset rich and income poor, it doesn't let them off the hook. So it may well be that a lump sum of child support is the appropriate approach. Or it
Okay.
may be that if there's a history of no child support being paid, that is definitely going to be a relevant factor in relation to how you divide the matrimonial pot. So it might be that if a generous payer in relation to child support might make a smaller adjustment in relation to the over 50% to the spouse who has the care of the children, someone with a poor history of paying their child support is more likely to be paying a much greater percentage of the matrimonial pie to the carer spouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, I hope that answers your question. And shout out to Kathy, Demetrius, James, and Michelle. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your support. We do have another question that's just come through, and it is in relation to the matrimonial home. So I might direct it to you, Nani. And in terms of how to decide whether to sell or retain it, we probably did answer that question a little bit in the last chat that we just had. But let's just talk a little bit further about what is involved in retaining that family home. If you do choose to be the partner that buys out the ex and wants to retain that family home, what are the considerations? How does it work from a deposit perspective? You know, do we have to pay stamp duty? Let's talk about all of those aspects.
So the positive, if I may say, so the positive part of you wanting to retain the house will be that you will save on stamp duty costs. There is no stamp duty payable on the purchase. It is considered as refinancing as such, and because of it, you save that portion of money. You will still have to have some costs such as your conveyancer and the transfer. So there's some small costs that will need to be factored in there. The process that happens with the clients that have come to see me because they are separating is we normally always go through the fact find. We talk about where they currently are, what the financial position is, what sort of income that we are expecting, and based on all that, and based on what sort of that commitment that you currently have, we can then work out what is actually your servicing capacity. Because again, as I said before, you need to know that before you can actually say, I'm going to keep the house. But if you can only afford to pay 50% of what is currently owing on that, then unfortunately that may not be an option sometimes. And again, as you say, Marissa, the important thing is sometimes when the other partner has stopped paying, whatever you do, please do not stop paying the mortgage as well. I know that it sounded like you are protecting the other party's credit score, but really you are protecting your own credit score as well at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, great. We've had a question come through Facebook. So if the wife decides to work part-time, that can be taken into account when calculating what the husband has to pay. So that was probably along the lines of what we're talking about, Bev. So how does that work?
If a wife decides to work part-time because of the care of the children, then that can absolutely be taken into consideration
in a positive way towards the wife?
Yeah, exactly. That no one's going to punish a parent for wanting to be a parent and staying home with their children. I think it becomes a bit tricky when the
children's care is
the primary consideration for the court.
And probably the age of the children would be relevant.
The age and stage of the children, whether they have any disabilities, whether it's reasonable for them to need a full-time carer. But basically, the family court in this country isn't in the habit of making people go to work.
Yeah.
They can't.
So it is
if the mother wants to stay home with the children, then they're certainly entitled to make that decision.
Yeah, and I guess the other consideration there is if there has been a situation where one of the parties to the relationship has been the primary breadwinner, the other party has been the primary carer. How does that sort of all work out and pan out in terms of the asset separation at the end? Are they both seen equal?
Yeah.
How does it all work?
During a relationship, one person's contribution as a wage earner is considered to be equal to the other person's contribution as a homemaker.
Sure. So
the court
there's no disadvantage for taking time off work to have time with the kids.
No. The only disadvantage, of course, is that you lose. The sad reality is that a lot of women who do stay home with their children for a period of time lose their ability to kickstart their career and move up the corporate ladder in the same way if they hadn't had an interruption to their career. And I don't think it's given enough weight when there are adjustments at the end of a family law property settlement. It's given some consideration, but it's not given sufficient to compensate them.
And I think from a financial perspective, another consideration that's really important is that the party to the relationship that hasn't worked as much and has been the primary caregiver, they potentially would also have less superannuation.
Absolutely.
So they are the ones that really need to focus on securing their financial future. Because beyond the separation and the divorce, and once that's all finalised, they're going to have to rebuild their life, their financial life, but also plan for their retirement and their future. So it's really important that they get the right advice.
Absolutely.
And some of them, sometimes you can feel a bit vulnerable in that position and a little bit shy to ask the right questions or get the right advice, and maybe feel like your knowledge or your understanding is not where it should be. But I guess that, I sort of just reach out to you if you're in this position to really come and speak to us, because you do need someone that's really going to hold your hand and nurture you through that process and help you to build your financial situation so that you can have a really positive future that you deserve. So okay, that's really good. So what are the steps going back to the home ownership? Someone wants to retain their home. We've sort of already talked about coming and speaking to a broker. What are generally the steps involved in the actual transaction part of it? Like, how does the bank approve? Do we need to get the legal agreement first? What are actually the steps of actually making the transfer of the home and the home going from joint names to just one person?
So From my perspective as a broker, what I do is basically, as I said, I look after the loan application part of it. So we go through the normal loan application process. Once we know what your servicing capacity is, and that you can retain the house, we will need to look at how much the house is worth, how much debt is actually contained in there. There will be a legal part of it as to the separation of that asset, how much the other party is going to buy out the other party, if there is actually equity.
And is it true to say that most banks would like the negotiations to be complete, or at least the parties to sort of know how the assets are going to be distributed and who's going to get what?
Well, this is normally what happens when the client comes to see me. I will say to them, well, has there been any negotiation? Has there been any agreement as to how you're going to separate the asset? And that is where sometimes it's good that when it's part of the client that comes from Bev's team, I could call and speak to the lawyer, kind of like we kind of work together to the benefit of the client. So once we know that the client is capable of purchasing the house from the other partner, what we do then is we go back to the legal part of it. We get it, all that working of the legal team that I don't get involved in as such. And then once all that agreement is sealed and signed, then normally we will say, now we have a settlement date for the house to be completed. And it's almost going through like a normal purchasing process as such.
Okay.
You go through the transfer of the title, which is done by the conveyancer. And then, on the settlement date, all the transfer is done, the title is done, the house title will be transferred basically to the party that is retaining the house. It is very, very similar to the purchasing process, except that you are saving on that stamp duty part of it.
Yeah, and I guess the other saving that you do have for those of you that are in this situation is that if you have bought a house and you have borrowed more than 80% of the value to buy the house initially, you would have paid potentially some lender's mortgage insurance. So if you are in a situation where the value of your debt is still above 80% of the value of the house, we are able to help you to make sure that lender's mortgage insurance doesn't have to be repaid potentially.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be repaid. In some instances, we may have to pay additional. It depends on what it is, but you never have to pay the full amount of a lender's mortgage insurance again.
So it's important to just make sure that your broker's giving you the right advice about that too. Yeah, okay.
Can I also add that if people are going to be buying out their spouse, it's really important that before you hand that cheque over at settlement for the amount that they're paying their spouse for the transfer of the house, that it's recorded in a consent order, so that there's no. Otherwise, you hand over a cheque, for example, for $100,000. Exactly, and then that person goes and spends it on nothing.
Yes.
And then they say, "Oh no, I don't agree now."
Yeah.
Then the only asset left is the house.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the consent order. As
important.
I have worked with a few clients now, I know that the consent order is so important. If I have come across anybody that are going through that process, I always say to them, you should go and seek legal advice and get a consent order.
Yeah.
Because
and it's not expensive in the scheme of things, just to protect yourself in that way.
Because as Bev say, you do not know what will happen in the future.
Correct.
And at the moment, it may all be fine, that you are all happy to go down the 50-50 part. But then in the future, something happens and then the other party may come back and
change their mind.
That's right.
So can we move now on to that? Because we did have quite a few questions through the week about that side of things in terms of, I guess, let's say that they've been through the divorce, everything's been finalised, everyone's got their share of the assets. How do you best protect yourself moving forward against claims from future partners? Because obviously if you've just gone through this process and you've managed to keep the family home, or you've managed to get a sum of money that can give you a deposit, how do you then protect that from the next relationship, or do you need to? Is there a way you can? And also, I guess, in terms of, we'll address it from the legal perspective, but I'd also like to address it from the finance perspective in terms of, getting back into the joint account situation and merging your finances with future spouses. So let's go legal first. Right. You've finished the divorce process. How do you go about protecting yourself moving forward?
The safest way is never have another relationship.
Oh.
Stay alone, miserable. Keep your money. That's one, the safest way. There isn't really.
We want our clients to be happy, Bev.
Yeah, so. I hate to break the news, but only today, we learned about a landmark decision that's come down from the family court, from the High Court actually, as a result of a family court case that was, I think it was heard in about 2006. And it's just finished through the appeal process, and it was to do with what's commonly known as a prenup, but it's actually called a binding financial agreement.
Okay.
So people enter these prenups thinking that they're secure, and it finalises anyone's opportunity to claim against their property when they come into a relationship. No, it doesn't.
Prenups don't really work.
No, I've always seen them as a hurdle. You can certainly have a prenup. And it's a bit like, you put a hurdle up and some people won't even try to jump over it. Oh no, the hurdle's there, so I'll leave it alone. And there are some people that are going, right, this isn't working for me now at the end of this relationship. I don't like this prenup. How do I go about challenging it? And so the High Court has just now given the wife, in that case, the opportunity to set aside the prenup, even though the appeal court allowed upheld it, because the wife had legal advice. And the full court said, no, she had legal advice. She was properly advised. She was advised not to sign it. She signed it anyway against her legal advice. And the High Court said no, well, she was put into a position where it was an unreasonable agreement, and she signed it even though she had legal advice. She still signed it, so we should still set it aside because it was unconscionable. So prenups are a hurdle, but they're not a guarantee.
Do you recommend, is it worth getting a prenup to create that hurdle, or do you just...
It depends. Yeah. And I think a lot of people won't want to spend the money on a prenup. There are a lot of lawyers charging an arm and a leg for them because they're like ticking time bombs in your filing cabinet that you just never know when it's going to go off.
Yeah.
And another way they could do it, which isn't ideal, but what I see a lot of dispute about at the end of a relationship is a dispute about what everyone brought into the relationship. One person says, oh, well, I had a house and it was worth $300,000 and it was I only had a small mortgage, and the other person says, no, it wasn't worth anywhere near that, and your mortgage was much higher. So at the end of the relationship, getting some credit for your initial contribution is tricky when you can't quantify that.
So I
say to people, if you're starting a new relationship and you don't want to do a prenup, another option, it's not ideal but it's better than nothing, is to at least create an inventory with supporting documents. You might get your house valued and put the valuation with it. Get your mortgage statement and put that with it. Get your bank statements. Get your super statements. Get all your furniture and effects valued. Get a car valuation.
So that it's all there.
Package it all together.
So that if something does go wrong, you
can prove what you've brought in. And ideally, if the other party is in agreement, you would have their inventory with supporting documents, and you'd both sign it.
Yeah.
Sign both inventories, so that at least you've got some
advice.
Evidence of what you started with, as opposed to having at the end having an argument about who had what.
And if anyone does want to get a bank valuation out there, we can actually order them at no cost to you. So if you are interested in that, and that does help you with your inventory,
I'm glad to know that.
Yeah, so if you've got
a few clients would love to know that.
Yeah, we can definitely get a bank valuation organised pretty quickly at no cost. So if that is a useful thing, get in touch with us and we'd be happy to help you out with
Fantastic.
that. So we are running out of time, but thanks to Sue, Twee and Louise for tuning in. Really appreciate your support. And we're pretty much at the end of most of the questions. I think we've answered most of the questions that have come through the week. Is there anything else that you think we need to talk about?
There's one thing I'd like to say, and that is I see a lot of difficulties when people have bought the next house when they haven't settled properly with their spouse. So they've gone into signing a contract because they need to move out and they want to buy that house, and they've got a handshake deal where they're going to get the money, and then they are committed to this contract, and then their spouse says, oh, no, I don't agree now. And they've got them over a barrel because they've got a contractual obligation to settle on the property they've purchased. And so then the other spouse has a huge advantage in relation to the ongoing negotiation. Right. So my advice would be, don't go buying or committing yourself to something. If you are desperate to buy the next house, you might sign a contract subject to settlement of your family court matter, not just subject to an order even. You want settlement on the outcome.
And I guess that sort of raised another thing in my mind is that it can sometimes be a difficult time to make big financial decisions because you're obviously going through a lot at that stage, and it's not just the finances and the legal side that you're worried about. That's probably the last thing on your mind. But you can often see situations, and Nani would probably have seen this, where you have actually gone, one party's actually bought the matrimonial home and retained it, and then just after it's all done and dusted, they regret it and they think, I can't live here anymore. And then they just want to make a spontaneous decision to sell it or move somewhere else or buy something else. What would your advice be, I guess, from a finance perspective to people that are going through that and whether they should actually act on that instinct or give it some time and breathing space to, work through those emotional, work through the emotional times, but also just get their head clear to a point where they can actually think about it a bit more logically.
Yes. Look, it certainly is an emotional time, and the advice that I have given to some clients are, don't make a hasty decision. I know that it's a house that you have lived in together before and you feel that it's become a burden maybe, but if you want to, my suggestion would be rent the house out. Move out to where you want to live, to Glenelg or somewhere, and rent for 6 months. Take that 6 months to sort of know what it's like to be renting, because you may not enjoy having a 3 months inspection after being 15 years in your own home. You may not suddenly realize that this is not what you want and you're actually missing your home. But if you have sold that home, you do not have anything to go back to. If you retain that home and in 6 months' time you thought, yes, I wanted to make a decision now, by all means, make that decision then. You also have to remember, when you bought through the separation, you do not have to pay stamp duty. That is a saving in your asset. If you go ahead and sold that place and then you realize after 3 months in a rental that this is not for you, when you come to have to think to buy a new house, you will have to come up with a deposit, and you will have to come up with the stamp money for the stamp duty, which is about close to 5% on the purchase price. So you have to take all that into consideration. And I personally think that after everything that you've gone through, take a 6 months break as such from the house could be a good thing. But don't make that decision right there and then. Make that decision 6 months later.
Yeah.
And if I can add as well,
Yes.
Marissa, is that talking about if you meet another love of your life after the first one, I think it's very important that if you have not previously been active in managing your finances, that you should make yourself active in managing your finances. You should be aware of everything. You should not be just signing everything and be okay with not receiving statements and not seeing what's happening in your account. I think you need to be proactive as well.
And take an active role in the management of finances.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Look, I think we've had some really great advice from Bev and Nani tonight. Thanks for joining us, ladies. And look, we understand that it is a difficult and emotional time if you are going through a relationship breakup. And I guess I just wanted to reach out and let you know that we are here to support you. And if you do want to have a one-on-one chat and just talk through your personal situation with any of the team at Rise High, and also I'll offer your services, Bev, as well.
Absolutely.
We'd love to just sit down and help you and work with you and hold your hand through the process and make it as stress-free as possible. Just quickly before we wrap up, we do have one last property seminar coming up for the year, which is next Tuesday night. We do still have a few spots available for that. That is focusing on property investment for business owners. So if any of you out there are a business owner or know a business owner that is also interested in property investment, that's the seminar for you. Once again, we do have the Rise High Investor Book, so if you are interested in property investment, grab a copy of that. And that pretty much sums it up for tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Rise High Facebook Live. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Marissa. Bye.